Good morning, daughters of the earth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. When you think of a frame, what's the first thing that you think of? Naturally, many would and could think of a picture frame, which is what we have here in this video. But what about the frames that are used in a media format? For example, we use frames per second in order to characterize how many images can be played within 60 seconds or 24 seconds or 30 seconds, which would be frames per second, FPS. We have examples of these in a media form. So my apologies. We have examples of this in a literature form, which is like the perspectives that we get when we're reading a book, for example. If we are reading a story, we have three different types of perspectives we get. We have the first person perspective, the second person, and the third person. The first person obviously being the main character's perspective. The second perspective would be a person that was examining the main character. And then the third person would be a godlike figure, the narrator that is explaining all the events that are happening in the story. I found myself appreciating the purposeful uses of frames that aids in providing a second perspective of the scene playing out before our eyes. The show that I recently found to use these frames in this specific format is the show Bridgerton. Specifically, I'm referencing the spin-off's prequel called Queen Charlotte, A Bridgerton Story. There are two scenes that are specific in my mind. And today I simply wanted to share these two scenes, how these frames were used, and my personal thoughts and feelings about the uses of these frames. But before we get there, I would love to welcome you all to my channel. My name is Rissa, and I mainly make video diaries, kind of, on the things that I really enjoy. I hope we can have a further discussion and share our interests with each other. If you guys enjoy the video, hopefully you guys will be inclined to give some comments about what you find, if you think that there are things that are different, or whatever the case may be. But let's get into it. So, getting into Queen Charlotte, this TV series again is a prequel spin-off to the show Bridgerton, which focuses on Queen Charlotte and her marriage and working through her arranged marriage with King George. This show does many things in utilizing time skips to really emphasize various events and to further drive home specific conversations and their impacts. I really love the progression of the show in revealing the realities of mental health treatments in older medicinal practices and the use of racial discrimination and how Black capitalism doesn't ignore the color of your skin. It's still capitalism at the end of the day. Now, for this first frame, I really wanted to emphasize this one was kind of referenced in the trailer. We're given this garden scene where Queen Charlotte is considering and then further attempts to climb over the wall in the garden to escape this arranged marriage because she is unaware of who George is. She doesn't know if he's beautiful, if he's not beautiful. She doesn't know anything about him. The most that is said is that he's a good king or he's a good prince, but there's nothing really else there. There is one scene, however, that's prior to this garden scene that showcases that George is the one who will disrupt this attempt of her climbing the wall. And no, it's not the scene where Brimsley is sharing that he cannot find the soon-to-be Queen of England. This scene is a scene that was showcased on the screen where we as the audience are ultimately kicked out of the perspective as the passive viewer, and we're ultimately shifted to the role of the active viewer. The reason why I say that is because in this scene specifically, it is very much different compared to the other scenes. The prior scene, we are following Queen Charlotte as she is leaving the castle. We get an overhead shot of her pacing back and forth in the garden, pacing back and forth again, looking at the wall. And then we just get this random scene. We get this random cut. I find it very distinct that we are a good few yards, a yard, a feet away, maybe a few feet away. And we are watching her cross over to the left side of the screen, but we're not with her at that point. We are separated from her. I found this scene very profound because the use of this frame is really showing her isolation. One,
Because of the high walls on the both left side and right side of her, and the small gap in between those two high walls is really emphasizing that even though there's so many people inside and there may be a whole bunch of things around her, she herself is the only individual in this space and is thus isolating herself from everywhere else.
but also two, in this scene, because we were just following her, and then all of a sudden we are kicked away from her and we are kept behind her and simply in this position of watching her. It showed me when I first watched it that there was something I needed to pay attention to. When I first watched this scene, my first question was, who is watching Charlotte at this point in time? You weren't really aware of who was watching her. In the trailer, you see that George ends up speaking with her, but this scene specifically, you did not know who was watching her until George made himself known. And even then, it doesn't really answer the question of who was watching her within this given time. So I really love the use of it because this was very intentional. You could tell, at least for myself, you could tell it was very intentional. This use was to showcase one, her isolation, because, and also just another thought too, it feels very claustrophobic in a way because of how small the pathway is and how narrow it gets towards the end where she's walking back and forth. It becomes very tight for her. It showcases that she feels very claustrophobic, and we know that she's feeling claustrophobic and very anxious with the idea of marrying someone that she has no clue of who he is. So in this situation, that's what it really portrays, at least based off of my analysis of the scene. On a side note, I really love the emphasis within this show in general of the garden as a metaphor for intimacy, for passion, for romance, anything of the sort between the characters within the show. Obviously, that wasn't the only space where romance was permitted. We have obviously bedrooms, which is very obvious. However, passion is seemingly exemplified about the bountifulness of a garden compared to the closed doors where passion is restricted to intimacy and closeness of persons. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that sure you have bedrooms, sure. However, the use and the metaphor of the garden within the show is really showcasing how bountiful this sensation is for women, and also for how beautiful it is and how beautiful it can be for women as well. And I think it's really interesting when Lady Bridgerton is the first person that really gets into this idea of the garden and portraying the garden as passion. We see it in the scene where she and Lady Danbury are speaking, and Lady Danbury is noticing that there's something going on with Mrs. Bridgerton. She doesn't really understand what's going on. She doesn't really understand why she's been
It
acting out of sorts. And
seems my
Miss Bridgerton lets her know that it's because her garden
garden
is in
is
bloom.
in bloom.
I feel like this scene was really important. I think it's really important to the entire show because I've noticed with both this spin-off and Bridgerton, they have a lot of references to a garden throughout the series. Now, I'm not going to get into the main show of Bridgerton, but I will in another video, specifically highlighting the talk of the garden as a sight of passion. I'm going to talk about that in another video, but for this video, I'm just going to reference some things I've noticed. So, obviously, that first scene where Violet Bridgerton is informing Lady Danbury that her garden is in bloom, and it's very uncomfortable for her because she never thought that it would ever be in bloom again. But ultimately, this is just a showcase of her passion that she has not felt since her husband's passing. I found that there was another scene where it really talks about passion. I think this scene, maybe I'm not reading this scene well. I'm mainly looking at it from George's perspective. The dimming of the lights in this scene, it really showcases that yes, he's not in a sound mind. There's something more dark and dim in this scene, with the fact that George's mental illness is really coming to light now. We're truly seeing the thing that he was trying to hide this entire time, and the lighting, also with the fact that yes, it is nighttime. However, the lighting within this scene is really showcasing yes, this is something that's supposed to be kept in the dark for a reason. And there's a pathetic fallacy with this scene because of how dark it is nighttime. I understand that. However, it really exemplified that this is supposed to be a secret. This is not something that's supposed to come out ever. It's supposed to be quiet. You're never supposed to know about this. But in this scene, we see how passionate George is for Venus. We see how passionate he is for her, so much that he strips off his clothing so that he can be bare in front of her, so she can see him in his fullness, so she can see him in his entirety and not just in parts. He doesn't clothe himself and hide himself from her. He allows himself open so she can see. And I feel like in this scene, even though it's not the same passion as I'm describing in other scenes, I feel like the scene is very important and that it does really showcase that passion that the garden seems to be referencing. Now, it's not the same. And I would say that in this scene, it showcases it's not the same because I feel that when we talk about the bountifulness of this garden as a metaphor, I'm not sure how it works in the other scenes, but I'm wondering if there's going to be flowers and stuff in the other scenes that I will analyze in the future. If there are flowers and stuff in these scenes when these passions were taking place. Because if so, then that would answer some questions that I have in my mind. But that's just another thought that I had. Now, onto Lady Danbury. One thing I found very notable was when she is first heading into the garden by herself. She had just lost her husband, Lord Danbury, and she had decided that she was going to
walk towards
a little cabin by herself. One thing I found very interesting about that scene is that they really emphasized a lot the wheat around her. And I found this really interesting. Since we are talking a lot about the garden and stuff, I wanted to understand if that scene is supposed to be referencing the fact that she does not understand what it means to have her garden in bloom. And the reason why I ask is because since we've already heard it, the literal episode is called
Gardens in Bloom.
In the scene where she is making her way to the cabin, the aerial shot and the bird's eye view shot of her walking through the meadow and there's little to no greenery really spoke to me because it made me realize, as I was analyzing for this video, it made me realize that there was a lot. She does not understand what it means to enjoy that act of intimacy. She had no clue. So therefore, when in her not understanding, her garden wasn't in bloom in that sense. It wasn't until Lord Ledger began to walk with her and they began to have a little promenade with one another and what he describes as a ramble. They started to have a ramble with one another. You start seeing that there is more emphasis on the greenery around them compared to the wheat that they are walking on. And I'm wondering for these scenes, if these scenes are supposed to emphasize that there is a growing passion between these two in relationships where they feel like they cannot open themselves to passion and open themselves to this forbidden act of passion and intimacy. Another scene that I remember seeing is the scene where Lord Ledger mentions that he believes that Lady Danbury is the freest widow he's ever seen, he's ever come to know. And in this scene, especially, there is a lot of greenery shown in this scene. It's to the point where they completely ignore the wheat around them, they ignore the dead grass around them, and there was a lot more greenery in this scene. There was a lot of medium shots between the two characters. So all you could see really, other than the cabin behind them, you see the green trees, you see the foliage, you see these things. And it's really emphasizing in my mind that there is this passion that's there between them. There is this passion that is growing. It's been festering for a while, and to the point where we completely are ignoring everything around them except for them too, because there's a beautiful bounty around them. Now, the only time in this scene specifically that it goes to showcase again this dead grass, it's not dead, but the wheat and what it looks to be dead grass, is when Lord Ledger, he pulls away from Lady Danbury just as they were about to kiss, and he bids her adieu, and then he leaves. And that's where we see the wheat, and we see that separation between the wheat and the trees, the foliage in the background. And then the camera is pulling back, we're seeing a frame again, we're seeing another frame within the frame, and then we see when he leaves, we see how isolated she is in this confusing, in this conflict between her giving into her passion and her maintaining this understanding that she can't even accept this idea of her being able to give into her temptation and stuff. It's really interesting. I've been getting, I don't know if you guys share the same thoughts, but I found it really intriguing that they put so much detail into these shows. They put so much details into these scenes that I never really paid attention to before. So now it's making me want to go back and rewatch, which I will go back and rewatch the Bridgerton shows again, the first season and the second season, and just see what they are showing, because they must be showing more. After me seeing this, I wonder how much they were accounting for and how much they were planning for. Now, the last scene, the very last scene, well, actually, no, before that last scene, actually, I found that there was a very profound scene between Lady Danbury and Violet Bridgerton, where Lady Danbury explains to her that her garden, they don't ever pay attention to widows. They never pay attention. Lady Whistledown, she never tells the story of the widow. She never tells the story of those who are suffering in silence, and that those that suffer in silence have to be their own friends, their own comrades. And I find that it was a really interesting and very nice story to hear, because it is true, you don't really hear stories about widows. You don't really hear stories about what they have to go through as a widow, what they have to go through in order to maintain themselves and to keep their heads leveled as they are going through these grief and stuff. Obviously, there's more to it, but I felt like this scene was really, I hope it was really touching to those that experienced what they were speaking on, and I hope it really shed a light on an invisible struggle that we don't really see in society. We mainly just refer to, you know, the same stereotypical stories. Everyone's in a gender war right now, and it's really irritating. But you don't really hear this side of the story too, where there are women that are struggling and they feel like they can't say anything because they're not going to be understood. And I hope that this scene really helped to make them feel understood. But even after the scene too, I noticed that when we cut away, I didn't notice this until I was getting the clips for this. There was a scene where they cut away from that very important conversation between Lady Danbury and Violet Bridgerton, and then afterwards they cut to Queen Charlotte, who is standing in her garden, and her garden has pretty much withered to nothing. And I found that really interesting. I never really paid attention to it before, but I find it really interesting and wondering that if this is supposed to symbolize the fact that though there is still little passion that she feels for her husband, there's not much because she was basically thrust into this marriage with little to no understanding of what was going on. So with her conflicts, the conflicting thoughts in her mind, she has absolutely no clue what to do, especially because of how young she was when she got married to him. She had absolutely no idea. She didn't understand. So I'm wondering if she was feeling this frustration as well because she didn't understand why these things were happening to her. She didn't understand why it is that she ended up marrying someone who had a mental illness and she wasn't informed. She wasn't able to make a decision for herself and now she had to deal with it. It was interesting. It was a really interesting scene to cut to after there was this deep talk about having this understanding between women, you know? Now we're on to the main event, I guess. We have Lady Danbury and Lord Ledger. I love this scene. I do. I find this scene very interesting because Lady Danbury, first of all, the lighting in this scene. It is making the melanin pop on this woman's skin so well. She looks phenomenal. She's a very beautiful actress, by the way. They did a really good job with this actress and the lighting. But I love it because there is such a rose-colored glasses feel to the scene. It's not pink, I know. But you know when it's golden hour and the sun's hitting just right and everything feels so serene and so beautiful. That's what this scene gives me. It gives me a feeling that there's a lot of rose colored things happening where we can just forget about the world for like a quick second and just give into what we are desiring for that moment. And one thing I definitely love about the scene is that they were able to really give that impact through the lighting, through the colors. The actors are doing a phenomenal job because there was a lot of intensity in this scene. I loved it. But one thing I loved the most about it was how much this scene conflicted me. And the reason why it conflicted me is because there's this scene where Lord Ledger walks in through the door and then afterwards the door shuts behind him. And in the scene, I was confused as to whether we were still a passive viewer or if we were an active viewer in this situation. And the reason why I asked that is because I felt like we were witnessing something which was true. We're witnessing a love affair. But I was wondering if we as the passive viewer were watching a love affair or if we were an active viewer watching through the lens of a person in the show. Obviously, the answer is given later on, but during this time when watching it, I did not know, I had no clue whatsoever if we were watching this scene from the lens of a maid, because earlier on in the show, we were informed through Lady Danbury going to visit the Queen when she was supposed to be on her honeymoon. We hear that the maids were speaking, and there was rumors going around that Lady Danbury had visited the Queen when she was supposed to be on her honeymoon. And that scene, when I was watching this scene play out, that thought came to my head that, okay, we know that the maids talk, so I'm wondering if we're looking through the eyes of a maid right now that was seeing something that that she shouldn't have seen. And then to beg the question, okay, if that were the case, who were we looking through the lens of? Later on, we find out it was Coral that saw it. And like that reinforced it for me to let me know, okay, I was on the right track. There was someone that was watching. We just didn't know who it was. But also, when looking at the scene, too, I love when the door closes, you know that she was having an affair with somebody. You just didn't know who it was. Obviously, we know. But you knew that she was having an affair with someone, you just didn't know who it was. So it shows you that it was a secret hideaway for them. There was still, it was supposed to act as a place for them to be with one another without the judgment of the outside world. However, there are still windows. And I think that reinforces as well, because it is, there's windows in it. Someone's always watching. Someone's always going to see something. Your secrets are never secrets, especially if you're someone of a notable class. Your secrets are never secrets. So it was interesting to see later on that it was indeed Coral that had witnessed the affair and questioned about it and said, "Oh, I thought that Lord Ledger was who you wanted to be with," and all that such, all that stuff. But yeah, those are the thoughts that I had for this show about the uses of frames within the show, and also the hinting of a further video, which I most likely will do, for gardens and the use of garden as a metaphor in this show. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I tried to make it a little bit more structured this time. I hope you guys did find it intriguing to hear. Maybe you guys will go and watch it further and see if you can pick out more situations where frames are purposely used to draw your attention to something. Maybe there are things that I didn't see that you guys remember and you feel the need. Please comment it down below. I would love to know what other scenes I may have missed. I love it when directors and even writers, when they do such purposeful work with their craft, where they have these scenes and they purposely do something in there where you will notice it. If you're as keen as you're trying to be, you will notice it, or you'll notice that something is a little bit off. And I really liked that in this one. And there was one where I didn't even notice it. And it was the one earlier on with when her and Lord Ledger, they didn't kiss and then he left and then there was a frame. That scene I never noticed. I didn't notice it before, but when I was looking for these clips and these snapshots, that's when I realized, oh wait, hold on, there was a scene right here. I missed this. I didn't see this before. So all that to say, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really enjoyed finding the clips and writing it out and thinking out what all my thoughts that I had. Hopefully you guys will feel the need to comment and give your thoughts and opinions. If you guys liked it, make sure to like it. If you guys want to see more videos like this, then make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications so you guys are aware of any more videos that I have. If you guys like the use of these types of conversations where we go and analyze certain events, then you guys may enjoy a previous video I had. I posted it 2 weeks ago talking about the 4B movement and the analysis that I made of the movement with 2 plays. One was Lysistrata and the other one was The Convent of Pleasure. If you guys like, again, these types of analyses, then I would suggest going to check that video out. But again, I hope you guys have a phenomenal day and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, my loves.